The sky that morning was a painting. Soft pink lights spilled across the Tennessee hills, the highway shimmering under a thin veil of mist. Inside the blue family SUV, laughter filled the air like a hymn. Matthew Trump drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting over his wife's fingers. Grace hummed along with the radio, an old worship song about storms and peace. In the back seat, 3 little girls sang louder than the music, their voices rising like sunshine itself. "Daddy, faster!" Lily, the eldest, shouted, hair whipping in the breeze from the half-open window. Matthew grinned. "If I go any faster, sweetheart, your hair's gonna fly away to Kentucky." The girls burst into giggles. Emma leaned over her sister's shoulder, clutching a doll. "We can catch it in heaven." Grace laughed softly. "Don't give your daddy ideas, girls. He'll start preaching again," Matthew chuckled. Hey, even Jesus liked a good road trip. They were returning home from their summer vacation, 3 weeks of camping, lakes, and laughter. It had been perfect. Matthew had even said it felt like God gave them those days as a gift before another busy season of ministry. He worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, but on weekends, he and Grace led youth missions through their church. They had spent years serving, building homes, praying for the sick, helping addicts recover. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was built on prayer and purpose. And that morning, as sunlight touched the windshield, Matthew whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. "Lord, you've been so good to me," Grace smiled. "He really has." The girls, half listening, started a new game, counting red cars on the highway. Rose, the youngest, shouted, 10. "I win. Every single time, no matter the number." Grace leaned back, closing her eyes. "Matthew, promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens in life, you'll keep singing like you do now. Even if it's through tears." He laughed softly. "You sound like you're saying goodbye." "I'm not," she said, eyes still closed. I've been thinking a lot lately about heaven. About how short and beautiful life is." He squeezed her hand. "You think too much, sweetheart." She smiled faintly. "And you trust too much." They drove in silence for a while, surrounded by light and peace. An hour later, the highway curved through open farmland. The sun was higher now, the traffic thicker. Matthew turned down the radio and focused on the road. Ahead, a pickup truck swerved slightly. Then again. "Grace," he said quietly. "That driver looks off." Grace looked up. "Drunk, maybe." "Maybe." Before she could reply, the truck suddenly veered across the divider. Tires screamed. Matthew jerked the wheel, trying to avoid it. Grace shouted, "Girls, hold on." The world became chaos. The sound was like thunder breaking the earth. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and light vanished. Then silence. For a moment, there was nothing, no pain, no sound, no thought. When Matthew opened his eyes, everything was wrong. The world tilted sideways. The windshield was gone. Rain dripped through broken glass. His hands wouldn't move. His legs felt absent. "Grace?" His voice came out weak. "Girls?" No answer. He turned his head, the slowest, heaviest motion of his life, and saw shapes. The car's interior was a ruin of smoke and blood. Grace's arm hung motionless. The girls, "Oh God," the girls, "No." His voice broke, barely air. "No, please God, no." A distant siren wailed. He tried to move again, but agony tore through his spine. God, please," he gasped. "Take me. Take me with them." He blacked out to the smell of gasoline and burning rubber. When he woke, it was night. The sterile white of a hospital room pressed around him. Machines beeped in slow, steady rhythm. His body felt heavy, his arms pinned by tubes. A nurse saw his eyes open and hurried out of the room. Moments later, a doctor entered with the quiet gravity of someone who'd done this too many times. "Mr. Trump," the doctor said gently. "I'm Dr. Patel. You've been unconscious for 2 days. You were in a severe collision. I need to talk to you about your injuries. Matthew's voice rasped. My family. The doctor hesitated. That pause, that silence, said everything. Matthew's throat closed. No, he whispered. Please don't. I'm so sorry, the doctor said softly. Your wife and daughters didn't survive the impact. Matthew's scream never came out. It stayed trapped in his chest, breaking him from the inside. For a long time he couldn't speak, he couldn't breathe. He could only stare at the ceiling, where the white lights blurred through tears. Finally, he whispered, "Why?" The doctor placed a hand on his arm. "You're lucky to be alive." Matthew turned his head, voice shaking. "That's not luck, doctor. That's punishment, doctor." Patel looked down sadly. "You also suffered a spinal injury, I'm afraid. You won't be able to walk again." The words landed softly, almost mercifully, compared to what he'd already lost. Matthew stared at his unmoving legs beneath the blanket. He didn't cry. Not yet. His soul was already too empty for tears. The doctor left quietly. In the silence that followed, Matthew whispered into the void, "God, are you still here?" No answer, just the soft hum of machines. Days blurred into weeks. Pain blurred into numbness. Pastor Daniel visited often, always carrying that gentle strength that never felt forced. He would sit beside Matthew's bed and pray softly. One afternoon, Daniel said, "You don't have to understand to trust Matthew." Matthew stared out the window, voice hollow. "Trust what, Pastor? That God killed my family and left me behind?" Daniel's voice didn't waver. "That God's not done yet," Matthew laughed bitterly. "You sound like my wife." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then she taught me well." They prayed together, or rather Daniel prayed and Matthew listened with an empty stare. But even then, something stirred deep inside him. Not hope yet, just a flicker of awareness that pain wasn't the end. One night, unable to sleep, Matthew whispered into the darkness, "Grace, girls. If you can hear me, I don't know how to live without you." A breeze brushed against the hospital curtain. For a moment, he thought he smelled her perfume, lavender and honey. Then he heard it, faint, gentle, like a memory carried by the wind. A child's laugh. He closed his eyes and sobbed for the first time. It wasn't despair this time. It was surrender. "All right, Lord," he whispered through tears. "If you didn't take me, then use me." When he was finally discharged, he returned home to an empty house that no longer felt like home. He sat in his wheelchair at the doorway, unable to move past the threshold. Everywhere he looked, ghosts waited. Drawings on the fridge, a pink backpack, a hairbrush. He wheeled himself to the living room and looked at the family photo on the mantel, Grace holding Rose, Lily and Emma on either side, all smiling at him as if the camera had captured eternity. He picked up the frame and whispered, "I'm still your husband. I'm still your father. I just don't know how to be anything else." Outside, rain began to fall. He tilted his head toward the sound, soft, cleansing, relentless. "Wash me, Lord," he said quietly. Not to forget, but to begin again. That night, lightning flashed across the window. Matthew dreamed he was walking again, barefoot through a field of light. Ahead of him, 3 small figures laughed, running through flowers. Grace stood at the edge, radiant, smiling. She reached out her hand. "Not yet," she said gently. "There's work still to do." When he woke, the tears on his face were real. He didn't understand what God wanted from him, but for the first time, he didn't ask to die. He whispered, "If I have breath, then I'll find reason." And somewhere in the silence, heaven listened. The first time Matthew tried to move his legs, nothing happened. The therapist, a kind woman named Karen, placed her hand on his shoulder. "It'll take time," she said gently. He nodded, though inside, he wasn't sure time could fix anything that mattered. Each morning, the rehab center came alive with the quiet sounds of perseverance, the hum of machines, the soft grunts of effort, the whisper of prayer. Matthew rolled his wheelchair into the therapy room daily, dressed neatly in a button shirt his wife once ironed for him, refusing to surrender the discipline she loved in him. Karen would say, "Ready?" And he'd force a small smile. "As I'll ever be." At first, he could only shift his upper body. Then, slowly, his arms strengthened. The pain was unrelenting, but he welcomed it. Pain, he thought, was proof that some part of him still worked. Between sessions, he'd sit by the window, Bible open on his lap. His hands trembled when turning pages. Some days, he stared at the words without reading. One afternoon, Pastor Daniel visited. He brought coffee and silence, the kind of silence that comforted instead of crushing. After a long pause, Daniel said, "Do you still talk to God?" Matthew gave a faint, humorless smile. "Every day. I just don't know if he listens anymore." Daniel leaned forward. "He does. He just doesn't always answer in the way we want." Matthew's voice cracked. "Then why take them and leave me?" Daniel looked at him, eyes full of compassion. "Because there's still something for you to do." Matthew let the words hang in the air. "I'm a cripple, Pastor. What could I possibly do?" Daniel's hand rested on his arm. "You can show the world what faith looks like when it still hurts." By the third month, Matthew had regained enough strength to wheel himself around without help. Nurses admired his quiet determination. But when he smiled, it never reached his eyes. One night, he wheeled into the therapy room alone. The lights were dim. He stared at the parallel bars where he'd practiced standing. He gripped them tightly and whispered, "Lord, I used to walk your streets, speak your name, lift others up. Now I can't even stand in your house." He pulled, grunted, cried out, and for a brief second, his knees locked. His body trembled upright. Tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, shaking. "Even if it's just for a moment." Then his strength gave out, and he collapsed back into the chair, exhausted but smiling faintly. It was enough. Weeks turned into months. The hospital walls gave way to his empty home once again. He moved through it slowly, wheels creaking over wooden floors that once echoed with the running feet of children. He placed new locks on the doors, not to keep people out, but to stop memories from escaping. Every morning, he'd set a plate for 4. Every night, he'd take them away untouched. Pastor Daniel visited weekly. They prayed, sometimes in silence, sometimes in tears. But one evening, Daniel said something that would shift Matthew's path again. "You can't live in the ruins, son. God may have allowed your world to break, but he didn't intend for you to stay buried in it." Matthew looked around his quiet house. "Then tell me how to rebuild without the bricks that made it home." Daniel's reply was simple. One prayer at a time. By spring, Matthew returned to his job at Global Link Logistics, the same corporate building where he'd once led a team of 40. The office smelled of coffee and ambition. The glass walls gleamed. But as he rolled through the automatic doors, heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few co-workers smiled politely, most looked away. He went straight to his office, smaller now, moved to the back hallway for easier access, they said. His computer sat unused, files untouched. No one had expected him back. By noon, his manager, Charles Milton, called him in. Charles was tall, silver-haired, and spoke in the smooth tone of a man who measured empathy like expense. "Matthew," he began, leaning back in his leather chair, "I'm glad to see you." "Recovering." "Thank you," Matthew said quietly. "I wanted to talk about expectations moving forward," Charles continued. "We value your perseverance, but the company's moving fast. Deadlines, clients, energy. Things you might struggle with given your circumstances." Matthew stared at him, unblinking. "My circumstances?" Charles cleared his throat. "You've been through something unimaginable. I just don't know if you can keep up with the pace anymore." "I can handle my job," Matthew said firmly. Charles sighed. "Let's be honest. You can't travel anymore." Half of your position involves site visits. We'd have to make accommodations. I don't need pity, Matthew interrupted. Just purpose. For a moment, their eyes met, one full of pain, the other of discomfort. Charles folded his hands. I'm sorry, Matthew. It's not personal. It's business. Matthew laughed softly, bitterness leaking through. It's never personal until it happens to you. Charles hesitated, then spoke the words that would echo for years. You're not useful to us anymore. The air left the room. Matthew stared at him, every nerve burning. You think my value left with my legs? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Charles shifted uncomfortably. We'll, of course, offer a severance. Keep it, Matthew said quietly. I've already lost more than you could ever pay for. He wheeled out of the office, silent as snowfall. That night, he sat in the dark living room, replaying every word. Not useful. He whispered it again and again, until it felt like a brand on his heart. In the corner of the room, his Bible sat unopened. He hadn't touched it since returning from the hospital. Now, reluctantly, he reached for it. The pages fell open to the book of Job. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Matthew stared at the verse for a long time. Then he whispered, You took everything, Lord. But if you're still here, I'll bless you anyway. He bowed his head and wept, not in despair, but in surrender. Days passed quietly. He began journaling, prayers, fragments of conversations with God. One day, Pastor Daniel stopped by again. You're writing, Daniel said, smiling. That's good. Just trying to remember who I was, Matthew said. Daniel shook his head. Don't chase who you were. Let God show you who you're becoming. Matthew looked down at his trembling hands. And what if I don't like who that is? Then he'll teach you to love the version that can still glorify him. They sat together, sunlight spilling across the floor. Daniel looked around the quiet house and said softly, You know, Grace once told me something before she passed. Matthew froze. You spoke to her? She called me 2 days before the accident, Daniel said. She said she had a strange peace, like she knew something was coming. Told me if anything ever happened, to remind you that her faith wasn't in safety, it was in salvation. Matthew's lip quivered. She knew. She trusted, Daniel corrected. And now you must too. Matthew closed his eyes. I'm trying. I know, Daniel said, rising. That's why you'll make it. Weeks later, Matthew's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something told him to answer. Hello? Mr. Trump? A woman's voice said. This is Sarah Collins from the Faith Journal. I recently heard about your accident. I'm working on an article about finding purpose through pain. Would you be open to sharing your story? Matthew hesitated. I don't have a story worth telling. I think you do, she said softly. Sometimes the stories that save others start where we stopped saving ourselves. He said nothing for a long time. Then, all right, but only if God gets the credit. Sarah smiled through the phone. That's exactly why I called. That night, Matthew opened his laptop for the first time in months. He stared at the blinking cursor, a tiny heartbeat of light in the dark. He began typing, My name is Matthew Trump. I lost my wife and 3 daughters in a car crash caused by drunk drivers. I lost my ability to walk. Then I lost my job. But I didn't lose my faith, not completely. I still believe God can rebuild ruins, even when the man inside them can't stand. He hit save. Then he whispered, Use it, Lord. And as the screen glowed against his tired face, a strange peace filled the room, quiet, fragile, but real. He didn't know it yet, but that simple testimony would travel further than his legs ever could. When Matthew hit post that night, he didn't expect anything. He closed the laptop and wheeled away, heart heavy but lighter than it had been in months. It felt like exhaling after holding his breath since the accident. The next morning, his phone buzzed, one notification, then another, then dozens. Hundreds of comments poured in. Messages from strangers. Your story saved me tonight. I lost my husband last year. Thank you for reminding me God still loves us. I thought God hated me. Maybe he doesn't. Matthew sat frozen, scrolling through tears. He whispered, Lord, what are you doing? For years, he had preached to churches of dozens. Now, overnight, his words reached thousands. He opened one message from a mother in Oklahoma. I read your post at 3 a.m. My son died in a drunk driving crash last month. I was planning to end my life this morning. But after reading your words, I prayed instead. Thank you. He covered his face with his hands and wept, not from pride, but from awe. It was the first time since the accident that he truly felt used again. That Sunday, he returned to church for the first time since the funeral. When he entered, the congregation fell silent. People had seen him broken before, in the hospital, in grief, but now something was different. He rolled down the aisle slowly, his Bible resting on his lap. The sunlight through the stained glass painted his face in colors of redemption. Pastor Daniel met him halfway. Brother Matthew, he said softly, it's good to have you home. Matthew smiled faintly. It's good to be home. During the service, Daniel preached on Job. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Matthew couldn't stop trembling. Every word felt like it was being spoken directly to him. At the end, Daniel turned to the congregation. Before we close, I'd like Matthew to share a word. Matthew hesitated, his throat tightening. He hadn't spoken publicly since the accident. He rolled forward, the entire church holding its breath. I don't have much to give, he began, voice steady but soft. But I can give this. God never promised we wouldn't break. He promised we wouldn't break alone. People began to cry quietly. I lost everything I thought made life worth living, he continued. But what I learned is that life isn't about what you have. It's about who holds you when it's gone. He paused, looking up toward the ceiling, eyes glistening. My wife and daughters are safe. That's more than most of this world can offer. And if my pain can help one person believe again, then I'd go through it all again. The silence that followed was sacred. When he finished, people stood, slowly at first, then all together. Some clapped, some simply wept. Matthew closed his eyes. For the first time since the crash, he felt purpose stronger than pain. Within weeks, Sarah Collins reached out again. Matthew, your story's spreading fast. The article we published has over 2 million reads. People are asking if you'll share more. Matthew smiled faintly. I'm no preacher anymore, Sarah replied. Maybe not, but you're what people need right now. A real voice. She helped him set up a small YouTube channel, nothing fancy. Just a webcam, a quiet room, and truth. The first video was titled Finding God in the Wreckage. He looked straight into the lens, hands folded on his lap. I shouldn't be here, he began. By all accounts, I should have died with them. But God doesn't make mistakes, even when we don't understand his methods. He spoke for 15 minutes. No script, no tears, just peace. When he ended, he said softly, if you're breathing, there's still a reason. By the end of the week, the video had 500,000 views. Emails flooded in from across the world. A pastor in Brazil wrote, we translated your message for our congregation. You helped hundreds find faith again. A woman from South Africa said, I was angry at God for taking my child. Now I understand, he didn't take her. He welcomed her. Matthew read each message slowly, his heart swelling. He started replying to as many as he could. One night, he paused mid-response and whispered, Lord, is this what you meant by using me? It wasn't a booming voice that answered, just a deep, quiet peace. He smiled. Then I'll keep talking. Soon, invitations began arriving. Churches, conferences, rehabilitation centers. Sarah called one morning. Matthew, you've been asked to speak at the National Faith Renewal Conference in Dallas. They want you to close the event. He hesitated. Me? There are real speakers for that. "You're as real as it gets," she said firmly. "They don't need another polished sermon. They need testimony." He laughed softly. "All right, but tell them I don't fly. My faith's strong, but my fear of turbulence is stronger." She smiled. "Then we'll drive." The night before the conference, Matthew barely slept. He stared at the empty side of the bed, where Grace used to rest her hand over his chest before he prayed. "Am I doing this right?" he whispered. "Would you be proud?" A soft breeze stirred the curtains. He closed his eyes. For a fleeting moment, he imagined her whispering, "Just speak from the scars." He smiled through tears. "I will." The next evening, he rolled onto the stage before thousands. The lights were bright, but the room felt sacred. He began quietly. "Most of you don't know me. I'm not here because I'm strong. I'm here because I wasn't, and God met me there." A hush fell over the crowd. He told them about the crash, the pain, the despair, the day he called God a stranger, and how mercy called back. When he spoke of his daughters, his voice softened. "I see them every time I look at kindness." He paused, breathing deeply. "My legs don't move, but my spirit walks further than ever." The audience stood. Some clapped. Some knelt and prayed. Matthew lowered his head, whispering, "All glory to you, Lord." That night, alone in the hotel room, he opened his phone. Thousands of messages flooded in. One caught his eye. It was from a man named Jason. "I was one of the kids who caused the accident. I served 6 years in prison. I saw your video today. I've lived every day hating myself, but your message, it broke me. If you can ever forgive me, I'll spend my life serving God." Matthew's hand shook as he read it again. He sat there, staring into the silence. The very face of his tragedy had written to him. He prayed for a long time. Then, he typed back, "Jason, forgiveness was given before you asked. I don't live in the wreck anymore. Neither should you. Let's both make something holy out of what's left." When he hit send, tears streamed down his face. It wasn't just Jason being freed, it was him too. Weeks later, he received a letter from the prison chaplain. Jason had begun leading Bible studies behind bars. The chaplain wrote, "He says every time he preaches, he remembers your words. Pain is the pulpit God never wastes." Matthew folded the letter and pressed it to his heart. He whispered, "Lord, you really don't waste anything, do you?" Months passed, and Matthew's ministry expanded beyond what he could have imagined. He called it Still Standing, inspired by Job's endurance and his wife's last words about singing through tears. He hosted live prayer sessions online. Thousands joined from around the world. Some nights he'd finish praying and just sit in silence, letting the weight of what God had done sink in. 3 daughters, 1 wife, he would whisper, "and somehow you gave me millions of souls to love instead." One evening, after finishing the stream, he wheeled himself to the porch. The Tennessee air was cool, stars scattered like grace across the night sky. He looked up and smiled. "Grace, Lily, Emma, Rose. You'd laugh if you saw your daddy now. Still crying, still preaching, still standing in my own way." He closed his eyes. "I don't understand your timing, Lord, but I trust your heart." The wind rustled the trees softly, almost like applause. He whispered, "Thank you for the pain that pointed me back to you." The next morning, Pastor Daniel stopped by for breakfast. "You've come a long way, Matthew," he said, sipping his coffee. Matthew smiled. "I guess God was serious when he said he'd make beauty from ashes." Daniel chuckled. "You're proof that resurrection isn't just for Easter." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter born not from joy but from peace. Later that day, Sarah called again. "Matthew, there's a publisher interested in your story. They want to call the book Still Standing, Finding Faith After Fire." Matthew chuckled. "You think people really want to read about me crying and praying in my kitchen?" Sarah smiled through the phone. "They don't want your strength, Matthew. They want your honesty. That's what saves." He paused, eyes glistening. Then let's give them the truth, the book released quietly. No marketing team, no celebrity endorsement, just a photograph of Matthew smiling from his wheelchair, a Bible resting on his lap, and the simple title still standing, Finding Faith After Fire. Within weeks, it climbed bestseller lists. What shocked Matthew wasn't the numbers, but the letters. They arrived from everywhere, envelopes thick with tears and hope. I lost my son to cancer. Your words make me sing again. I was angry at God for 10 years. Your story led me back to church. I thought paralysis meant punishment. You proved it can mean purpose. He read everyone. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he simply prayed over the paper and whispered, "Let these words reach where mine cannot." Publishers called. Producers called. Churches called. Mar, Trump, could you appear on Good Morning America? We'd like to adapt your book into a documentary. Our congregation in Manila wants you to speak through Zoom. He said yes to none of them at first. He didn't want fame. He wanted faith. But Pastor Daniel, ever the gentle voice, said, "Matthew, the world isn't asking for your story. It's asking for God's light through it. Don't hide a lamp under a bushel." So he agreed to one interview, then another, then a tour. Soon he was traveling again, not to warehouses and logistics hubs, but to churches, hospitals, stadiums filled with broken people searching for proof that pain could preach. Everywhere he went, he told them the same truth. I'm not the hero of this story. God is. I'm just the proof that he still writes new chapters after the crash. One afternoon, after a conference in Chicago, Matthew was wheeling toward his car when he heard a hesitant voice behind him. "Mar, Trump?" He turned. A man stood there, shoulders slumped, gray hair unkempt, clothes rumpled. It took a second, but recognition struck. Charles Milton, his former boss. Time had not been kind to him. "Charles," Matthew said softly. Charles tried to smile. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember," Matthew said. "How have you been?" Charles looked down. "Not great. The company went under last year. I lost everything. Heart problems. My wife left." He hesitated. "I saw you on TV. Took me a month to find the courage to come here." Matthew waited, letting silence be kind. Charles's eyes watered. "I came to say I'm sorry. What I said that day, calling you useless, it's haunted me. You were the strongest man in that building, and I was too blind to see it." Matthew's throat tightened. He remembered that office, the sting of those words, the echo of humiliation. But standing before him now wasn't an enemy. It was a broken man. He reached out a trembling hand. "Charles, I forgave you long ago. I had to. Forgiveness was the only way God could keep my heart from turning as cold as yours was then." Charles lowered his head and began to sob. "I don't deserve that." Matthew smiled gently. "None of us do. That's why it's called grace." He invited him to dinner that night. They sat for hours. Two men once divided by pride, now united by mercy. When they parted, Charles said, "You saved my soul tonight." Matthew replied, "No. God just used the man you fired." Months later, Charles was baptized in Pastor Daniel's church. He asked Matthew to lower him into the water. When he rose, dripping and weeping, the congregation erupted. Daniel looked at Matthew, whispering, "You see? Even ashes can evangelize." As the years passed, Matthew's ministry grew into the Still Standing Foundation, funding rehab centers for accident victims and widowed parents. He refused a salary. Every penny went to the broken he called my extended family. He lived simply, a small home, a faithful dog, shelves filled with Bibles in different languages. Every morning he began with the same prayer, "Lord, thank you for letting me wake up useful." 5 years after the crash, Sarah Collins visited him with good news. "Matthew," she said, setting a stack of papers on his desk, "your videos have reached 50 million views. We've translated them into 11 languages. Matthew smiled, shaking his head. 50 million? That's a number for pop stars, not paraplegics. Sarah laughed. Maybe God's both your producer and your publicist. He chuckled, then grew quiet. You know what I pray for now, Sarah? Not that people see me, but that they see what kept me alive when everything else died. She nodded. They do, Matthew. Every single day, that night, he hosted an online stream titled, When the Fire Becomes the Furnace of Faith. He looked into the camera, the same calm in his eyes as the day he first posted. Some of you are asking why God allowed the crash, the sickness, the loss, he said. Maybe the question isn't why he allowed it, but what he's growing through it. He paused, letting the silence breathe. I used to think my story ended on that highway. But God's not a God of endings, he's a God of edits. He rewrites ruins into revelation. The chat flooded with tears, prayers, emojis, hearts, millions listening in real time. Matthew smiled softly. If you're still breathing, you're still in the chapter he's writing. Later that evening, Pastor Daniel came over with supper. They ate in silence for a while, watching the sunset through the open window. You ever think about heaven? Daniel asked. Every day, Matthew said. Not because I miss death, because I miss them. Daniel nodded. You'll see them again. I know, Matthew said, eyes glistening. And when I do, I'll tell them their laughter kept me alive. A few months later, doctors discovered complications from old spinal damage. They told Matthew he needed surgery, risky, uncertain. He thanked them and said quietly, "Whatever happens, I win." Before the operation, he recorded a short message for his followers. If you're watching this, it means I made it home, whether that's back here or up there. Remember, God doesn't owe us explanations, only presence. And presence is enough. He smiled. Keep standing, even if all you can move is your faith. He didn't wake from surgery. He slipped away peacefully, Bible open on his chest. The world wept. News outlets ran headlines. Faith icon Matthew Trump passes away at 43. From tragedy to triumph, the man who taught millions to stand. At his funeral, Pastor Daniel stood before a sea of mourners. Matthew Trump taught us that paralysis of the body means nothing when the soul still walks with God, he said. He showed us Job's story reborn, that loss doesn't end faith, it proves it. Sarah read one of his last journal entries. Don't pity me. The legs I lost only grounded me to heaven sooner. The wife and daughters I miss are just the choir waiting for me to join. Until then, keep the music playing. Years later, at a rehab center funded by his foundation, a plaque hung by the entrance. The Matthew Trump wing, still standing. Because sometimes God rebuilds men by breaking their legs and then teaching them how to walk with hearts instead. Underneath, visitors had scribbled words of gratitude, verses, drawings of little girls with wings. Every anniversary of his passing, people from around the world gathered online to share what his story meant to them. A father wrote, "My daughter died. I was angry. Then I heard Matthew say, 'Heaven didn't steal her. It kept her safe. I'm still standing.' A soldier wrote, 'I lost my legs in war. Thought my life was over. Now I preach from a wheelchair.' And a young man named Jason, once the drunk driver, posted a video from a small church. Behind him, a banner read, 'Grace rebuilt here,' he said, voice trembling. 'I'm alive because the man I killed refused to let hate kill me too.' In the quiet of eternity, somewhere beyond sight, Matthew finally stood again. Grace waited with their daughters in a meadow of light. 'Daddy!' The girls cried, running toward him. He knelt, no wheelchair, no pain, just joy. Grace smiled, tears in her radiant eyes. 'You finished the work, love.' He pulled them close. No, he did. They turned toward the horizon, where the sound of worship rose like wind through wheat. And for the first time since the crash, Matthew Trump walked, not away from pain, but into the everlasting arms that had carried him through it.